Streaming services claim to normalize all tracks to -14 LUFS as a standard. But with popular tracks apparently often exceeding this level, the question is, should we really be mixing and mastering to any of these standards, they say? Hello beautiful person, welcome back to the channel. My name is Chu, and in this video we'll explore why sticking to any of these streaming guidelines could actually hurt the overall impact of your music, and how you can achieve a competitive, professional, and dare I say, a loud ass sound without being held back by any of these numbers. So I see discourse about this all the time all over my end of the platform, particularly on YouTube, but the last place I remember seeing anything about it was in my Discord server in the forums about a month ago. And so I also want to give you cheat codes that you can use to make your beats hit really loud, considering all of these guidelines. So first we have to understand why they even have these in the first place, and the whole point is just to standardize the way we measure the loudness across like all audio content, which makes sense because there's just like more audio content than there ever has been ever, so it's a good idea. Another reason is that specifically LUFS is a way of measuring loudness that reflects the human perception of loudness. So in that regard, it actually makes it a very useful, practical tool. And that kind of thinking is actually how I get the most use out of it in my production. It also has had what I'll call an interesting effect on the loudness wars, where the digital setting just allowed us to be able to make things louder than we ever could before, which caused a lot of issues in the quality of music. We could say it's still happening now. The loudness normalization standards and the way they kind of enact a blanket application across all tracks has kind of helped stuff not get too loud, but I think all it's really done is make people a little bit more mindful of loudness, and it's kind of actually forced the most crafty and prowess savvy people to just find ways of making stuff even louder without running into any of these ceilings or standardizations. And so for that reason, you might also hear some people saying it helped facilitate better mastering practices. I think right here is an important note to make that various streaming platforms, whether it's for audio or for video with audio as an accompaniment, they have different standards. Like one might have -14, another might have -12, another -10. And then the other important point is that they pretty much never bring audio up. They just bring overall levels down. But in essence, the entire point of the LUFS normalization guideline is to just enhance the listening experience and establish consistency across what is an ever-growing, rapidly expanding landscape of streaming services and digital music. Still, the question does remain, does this mean this is what we should mix and master to? And so as we move closer to figuring out an answer, I think it's important for us to consider why people even tell us to use these as guidelines in the first place. Because remember, the services automatically will normalize the tracks. And again, remember, they only bring levels down, they don't bring anything up. But the discourse is that we should be mixing and mastering and using any of these numbers as guidelines in the first place, with the goal to keep things consistent across platforms, right? But the problem with that is that trying to consistently adhere to any of these numbers or trying to adhere to a specific kind of number leads to a real homogenization of the sound, which basically just means everything is going to sound the same, or everyone's going to be trying to make everything sound the same. Now, I don't mean that to say that's like bad for music as like a culture thing. I mean, that's literally bad for your progress, you, the individual, as a musician. You're not going to make very much progress. And hint, not many successful people adhere to any of these guidelines, especially this one. But another reason people will tell us to use these guidelines is for the preservation of dynamic range. And I actually empathize with this justification a lot, because next to like equalization, dynamic range is probably my most favorite mixing topic. And I will at least say that these normalization guidelines have made producers and engineers more mindful about the preservation of dynamic range in face of the loudness wars. I think it's helped us to avoid excessive compression and limiting, and just to kind of have it in the back of our minds in general. But the thing is, while these guidelines like -14 LUFS or -12 LUFS may promote dynamic range preservation, the actual loudness of any mix depends more on the creative choices made during the production rather than adhering to specific loudness targets. And the truth is that some genres just thrive more on aggressive loud mixes, and using any of these measurements as a guideline is going to limit the potential of artistic expression and the emotional impact of the music. Now, the juggernaut of justifications for these guidelines is that it's the industry accepted standard. I think the sentiment is that a lot of professionals and platforms have adopted this as the de facto standard for loudness, which means that following this guideline is going to have you aligning with the current practices and expectations. Basically, if you do what the professionals do, you will will be treated like a professional. And that really brings us into the climax of this video, because I'm gonna put all 10 of my toes down here and just say that just because a standard is widely accepted doesn't mean that it's the best approach for all producers, all engineers, or all genres. For one, theoretically speaking, relying on industry norms could stifle innovation and discourage experimentation, which would lead to music never changing, which would mean it would die. That would be bad. Further, artists that push boundaries, especially concerning matters of loudness, tend to find more success than those who don't. I'm sure we can think of a bunch of really dope examples in very recent history that have absolutely said fuck the rules to a very resounding applause. Because I think at the end of the day, it's more of the impact you make on the listener than it is about if you adhere to any streaming normalization guidelines. But that being said, it's what the professionals do, right? It's what the professionals are doing, right? Or is it? Hey, check it out. I'm editing this video right now. But like, let's explore. So I'm on Toombat, which is a website that gives you a bunch of data about songs, right? It's really useful for DJs particularly. And one really useful stat it gives you is loudness in LUFS. They measure it in loudness units full scale. So let's just look at like really popular songs to start with, right? We won't even go to anything in trap yet. -5, boom. We'll just do this really quickly because I think you'll start to get the point. You seem like a very intelligent person. -10, Billie Eilish. Let's go Post Malone, Morgan Wallen, -5. Now let's start to look at stuff like Future. Let's look at Throwaway, -8. And that was from a while ago. -5. Unlike that. Plutoski, that dropped in under a month ago, -8. So do you see like what I'm getting at? The thing that we're talking about isn't really the actual amount of loudness. That's what they kind of corrected for. And it forces us to be more mindful of loudness so that we focus on dynamic range. Because if we keep looking, I don't think you're gonna find a -14 anywhere for a while. And that's kind of the point that I want to get at. And that we will explore a little bit more deeply in just a moment, is that you want to do things in your track that's actually going to make it loud for the sake of it being better, not because you're trying to hit some target. And that's what those tips are going to help you do. All right, back to the video. The other video, whatever. So here would be my recommendation for how to mix loud without being distorted or having to worry about any streaming guidelines. For one, stop worrying about the streaming guidelines. I mean, I don't know, bro. Like, I'm just a guy who does do this for a living and who has a decent amount of like accolades and stuff. So I'm just going to give you the advice that I literally use. You know what I'm saying? I do check it. I do measure it in various situations and scenarios. And if you want to talk specifically about that, I'll be talking about it on my newsletter soon. So grab the 14 drum kit to join the list if you're interested about talking about that topic. And eventually it might make it to the channel. It'll be a while though. But I can tell you that I only do that about 5% of the time, and it's only useful less than 1% of the time, at least for me. And thinking like this over time has really helped me avoid situations of thinking I need more or less loudness based on these guidelines. And I just kind of use my ears. That forced me to train my ears, which made me a better producer. And on the side of being an engineer, a much better engineer in a much shorter amount of time. Step 2 is you need to mix your big 3 extremely loud. So to go through the big 3 concept very quickly, the big 3 are the 3 elements in your mix that are supposed to be the most prominent in order to have it be sounding loud and clear and just competitive and professional sounding. Number 1 is going to be all of your low end, so kick, bass, 808 and things of that nature. Number 2 is going to be your main snare or clap, so usually that thing hitting on the 3 if we're talking about trap music, or it would be the 3 and then the 4 if we're talking about drill, and so on and so forth, and things of that nature. And then number 3 in the big 3 would be the melody if we're talking about making beats, but if you were mixing an actual song, it would be the lead box. But let's just stick with talking about beats today. The key is you want to make sure these are loud. You want to make sure the samples you use for the kick, the 808, the clap are really good. And you want to make sure your mix on the melody is good overall. You want to use things like saturation on the melody to make sure you're getting the most out of your dynamic range. And you want to make sure you're EQing in the right spots on your low end and your snare to make sure it pops, cuts through the mix, and gives you the maximum loudness. I talk about the big 3 like at least once or twice a month on my newsletter. So again, grab 14 if you want to nerd out with me on that. But do let me know down below in the comment section if you guys want me to do another video on the big 3. I think it's been a few months since I went over it. TLDR, make those 3 things very loud. And then you can just blend everything else in. Number 3, clip the fuck out of everything, bro. If you're not already doing it, do it. Brick wall limiting and soft clipping are the sounds of modern music. You've got to do it. You will not be competitive. Your stuff will not sound loud. And especially with soft clipping, if you're not taking advantage of that to the maximum, you'll be trying trying to get it loud and it's going to sound distorted because you're running into the digital ceiling, when the point of using soft clipping is to simulate an analog ceiling, which will give you more warmth on that saturation and distortion on that top end, which is what you want. Again, I will be nerding out about this topic on the newsletter. Dude, join the newsletter. I feel like I talked about clipping a little bit too much on the channel, but you guys let me know. But on the newsletter, I just get to nerd out a little bit more, so it's always fun. And then number 4 is some mega sauce, so I gotta show you this right now. So y'all already know how much of a nerd I am about equalization, and that means I'm going to be talking about frequency distribution quite a bit. And I know y'all are tired of hearing me say it's the solution to everything, but it is, bro. Look, there's this tool called tonal balance made by Isotope, right? It shows you frequency distribution and how it affects the overall tonal results output of your track. And then they put it all into this neat little like reference console that you can use to tweak the frequency of your tracks in real time to get things to sound more clear and more loud. So I'll kind of show you this for a few seconds, but do let me know if you guys want a full kind of walkthrough of how I use this, because even if you don't have it, seeing a demonstration of how I really do use equalization in real time to get my tracks to be loud and clear might actually be really helpful for you understanding how to manipulate this concept of loudness using equalization all to your benefit. So when I do get to the end stage of my mixing and mastering, I'm really just focused on frequency distribution. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but to let you know, for this specific track, the last night, I did spend a decent amount of time. This was the track I was talking about when I emailed you guys this morning. You might have got the message of where I was like, I spent like 3 hours working on it. It was this because I was just working on frequency distribution. But as you can see, there's no meters on my track. I'm sure we could open one up right now just to meter it for the sake of things. And you'll probably see that it's not going to be at negative 14 LUFS either. So it can definitely be helpful. I can use this to assess whether or not I want to push gain into a clipper, for example, or whether or not I want to slap a vintage limiter on my master or something like that, or my pre-master. But never, at least in my process, am I really thinking about loudness, especially, you know, at the end of the day, when my genre doesn't really benefit from making the music quieter. I'd want to make it louder. They're going to normalize it. Part of the sound design is making it to a certain level of loudness, but I wasn't aiming for loudness. I was just aiming for a certain type of sound, which required me to make it loud and clear at the same time based on what I know about mixing. Heavy stuff. Let me know if you have any questions down below. Do grab the free 14 drum kit for sounds from my placement and access to my really dope newsletter. I appreciate you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stay happy, stay healthy, and always be creating. Just make sure it's dope content only, and when in doubt, make better beats. I love you so much. I'll see you next time. Peace.